I've got the materials set out on the board. We'll need to make our obelisk and our totem. Set these aside and talk first about most essential element, and that would be the foam. We have basic pink insulation foam. In other areas, other countries, this is blue, this is white, but what you need is this type of foam. You don't want the styrofoam that's used as packaging and TVs or appliances. You want this stuff because this won't fracture. It's nice and solid. See, it comes in a few different widths. There's even a thicker. This is about the thickest sheet that I've ever had. So I think it's 1.5 inches. And that's what we're going to use to form our pylons. And I've got another piece that's about 1 inch thick, and that's a 1/2 inch to give us a little more variety in our thicknesses. One last piece here. This is foam core. It's foam in the middle, about the same consistency as the pink foam, but on either side is some stiff paper. Gives it a lot of strength. It's also about 1/8 of an inch thick. We also have some ballast. This is a medium grade. I actually use several kinds. Got a heavy, there's another medium. This is light, some sand. Every so often I like to throw out heavier rocks. And this is a kind of a mixture of this medium and something just a little bit heavier. I also have something called oxide paste. This is essentially flex paste mixed with sand. But this is some really fantastic stuff that can be used to especially seal some gaps that you might get. So some of these, like here, we have some gaps, maybe some texture that's a little bit rough. The cuts went a little bit weird. That's what the oxide paste is perfect for. It also provides extra strength because it's, in effect, it's a glue. And on the subject of glue, we'll mostly be using this Elmer's glue. This is it's kind of a new formula. It looks like regular glue, but it's stronger and it dries faster. That's one of the most important elements of this. You can use wood glue if you want. There's nothing wrong with wood glue. I just think this actually dries just a bit faster. The super glue we won't use very much of because super glue on this foam will melt it. So it's only maybe when we're gluing foam core to foam core because we've got that layer of paper in between. One of the last things we might add to our totem is some vines. And to do that, I've got this 2-part mix, a clay epoxy sculpt similar to green stuff, except I think it has a little more, it's got a little more flexibility in its usage. That'll make it easier for us to do our vines on our totem. So that's going to cover all the materials. Now let's discuss some of the tools that we'll use to create these monuments. I've laid out most of the tools that we're going to use on our project. As far as cutting tools go, this is an important item right here. This is an extendable X-Acto knife. You can see it's got a long blade with these different different sections here. Every time you snap off one of these sections, in effect you have a brand new blade, nice and sharp, because you're replacing the tip. And the reason I like these bigger blades is because when we need to cut something that's really thick, like this, if you have a typical X-Acto knife, it's going to get you about that far, a utility knife. But this This is not even a brand new blade, and you can see it gets me all the way through even the thickest piece of foam. Here's some extra blades. Always make sure that these will fit your knife. And you kind of go through these pretty fast, because this, believe it or not, when you do so much cutting, this will dull your blades quickly. Got a smaller version. It's the same principle. It's just with a smaller blade, you can maybe do more of a circular cut. It gives you a little more flexibility on angles, that sort of thing. And I have a traditional X-Acto blade. I want to make sure these are almost brand new right out of the box. Even though this thing looks very sharp, I'm going to actually have to replace this, because cutting the pink foam to some of the precision we want, we need a brand new sharp blade. I also have a scissors here. Usually for stuff like this it's thicker, don't really use the scissors, but every so often there's a little burr on our foam core when we cut the paper. Scissors is good for that. Got this felt tip pen for marking off my lines. Good idea to have this around, because it doesn't make an indentation, but it's permanent, so it won't leach into your paint. Got one of my little beat up craft brushes. Use this to apply the oxide paste. And I've got a few of these metal rulers, really nice edge, solid edge for cutting. And also a triangle, so they have right angles, 45 degrees. That's going to be very helpful when it comes to measuring out our monument and where some of the cuts have to be. And this last thing here, this is actually it's a welder's glove. You could use a work glove if you wanted to, but this welder's glove is even thicker. It's almost got 2 layers to it because it had to be insulated. But I like this extra bit of protection right here. So in case, because we got these blades out so long, in case the foam breaks or something happens, it's going to hit here on this cloth instead of a regular work glove where it might go past the work glove. Now, as far as cutting goes, in the next segment I'm going to show you how to use this cutting rig that I created using one of those steel rulers. It's got a few pieces of extra foam on either end, and I got the ruler taped down. What I did was I used my triangle to make sure this is a square edge. So that means when I butt the foam up against this, and I go to do my cuts, they're going to be square. We'll talk about this more in our cutting segment. So I've got everything here that we need to make a very inexpensive cutting rig. Got a triangle, got some painter's tape. I have a couple of metal rulers. Now this one doesn't have the cork on the back. This one does. I have a piece of masonite here and a few leftover sheets of foam that are the same width as what I'm going to cut. They've been taped down to the piece of masonite and have been made square to the ruler using the triangle. So that when I butt this up against pink foam, the cut that I have is going to be square. You can see I've got the X-Acto knives out here, the long utility knife with the extendable blade. I've got a smaller one for finer work, and my extra blades. I also have my cutting block here. This is just a piece of foam that I've sacrificed. And this is one of the more important items here. This is my welder's glove. That really, anytime things go crazy with the knife, I've got a lot of protection here. I've even put this on for some more. See, this glove covers the wrist. Most work gloves only go up about this high. This one gives you about 2-3 inches of extra defense. And to do a cut, I'm going to set my hand here, put a lot of pressure, make sure my hand's on the opposite side of the blade. And I'm going to work in multiple cuts. So you're not trying to go all the way through in one shot. There's a second cut. This also lets me make sure this blade is perfectly horizontal. I'm going to give it one more cut, almost through. And that's all it's going to take is one more cut. And now I've got my piece, and I can use this as a pillar or as decoration. And if I wanted to do an angled cut, I'll set this up so that it's square. What I'm going to do is set my knife at an angle. I'm going to use this sawing action. Now you can tape your cutting platform to your table also to give it a little extra stability. And you see I'm trying to maintain the angle of the knife and still use that cutting motion. And that gives me an angled piece that I can use for decoration or for trim on a wall, say if it's on a monument. And I've also got now a little angled wall here. If you use a thicker piece of foam like this, then you'll get the same edge as this. Do the same thing with regular foam core. Obviously what you'd have to do is put an extra piece of foam core here, square it off. You can go really thick with the foam too. You could have a 2-inch piece, just make sure the pieces you put on either end are tall enough to accommodate what you're going to cut. So hopefully this shows you a nice, safe way to cut. It's very effective. You just throw your piece in here, it's square. And if you want a straight cut, so you can get nice, straight, clean cuts. The principle is go many times, at least 3, if not 4 or 5. And this was just on the 1/2 inch. If you're going to cut something that's 1 inch or even 2 inches, then you're going to want to do more and more cuts, and make sure you maintain your knife horizontal. Always horizontal until you want a beveled cut, like this. And in this case, go like this, and you're going to use the sawing action. If you try and go straight through, it's just going to tear up this bottom edge. So hopefully now you have an effective way to get all of your pink foam and your foam core. I'm going to start this off with our obelisk, and this most important part of the whole structure, this is what makes it really what it is that pointed tip. Now I've got just a piece of foam here that I've kind of sacrificed as a cutting board. I've got my vertical piece. This is the 1.5 by 1.5. It's cut to size. Remember, we have to leave enough so that we can make our pyramid point on the top. Now this is where you're triangle will come in handy, and our Sharpie. What I'll do is I'm going to mark this point right here, and then use my triangle, square this up against the edge, and I'll carry this line all the way around because I need this as a reference point when I'm cutting to make sure that my pyramid that I'm cutting lines up. It's nothing terribly fancy, it's just going to be helpful to have this guide that runs around. Now I have to find the halfway point. Well, I'm just going to mark it here, here, and there, which will let me do this right here. I'm going to mark off the pyramid shape that I'm going to be cutting. Like that. And that's, again, going to be a nice reference for when I make my cuts. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'll even do it on this section. It's going to be cut away, but I'm still going to do it anyways. You can see we're almost done marking this off. Now I've put a brand new blade on my big knife, so that should make it nice and sharp. One last line that I need to make is here and here. So I'm going to get my cutting board out. And what I'm going to need to do is cut this edge. So I'm going to cut along this line, along this line, cut along this line, along this line. So I think I'm going to make sure this is positioned so you can see it the best. And let's try this right here. Now I'm right-handed. This is going to be a weird way to hold this, but I just figured this works a little bit easier for you guys to see it. So what I want to do is get this blade out even a little bit farther. I'm going to secure it, and it's time to make some cuts. Now, just like I showed you in the other cutting, I'm going to use this back and forth sawing motion. Take off a little bit at a time. Don't get too crazy all at once. Finish that cut. Can turn this around to the same thing the other way. Start it out. Work my way down. Slowly. Now I'll have to do another cut. This and like this. So I can take a triangle and mark that off. And the halfway point. Now you can even save these angled pieces, these beveled pieces, for something else. I have a tendency to save every single piece of foam that I cut. I have a little box for leftover pieces of foam. Okay. So now, take my knife, line it up just like I did the first time. and slowly work my way down and keep the knife straight. So I have a little piece like that, and now we've got a nice little triangle section cut out. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. There we've got a point. Nice little obelisk right here. So before we start to glue some of these pieces together, nice fun little beveled piece to save for something else. Before we glue these together, I'm going to take some of my knives and I want to age this stone a little bit. I'm going to start with my piece of foam core and just gonna cutting away at the edge there. I like to go after the corners because that really makes stuff appear older when you do that. Trying to keep my thumb down here as I make these cuts. So this way, if the knife goes wonky, all it's going to do is just hit air instead of my thumb. So there we go. I have that piece. Now let's do some aging on this stone. But first, I'll take this pen. I'm going to maybe draw out some blocks like this. Not using the felt tip pen because I'm actually making an impression, trying to actually kind of gouge into my foam. And this can really enhance the appearance. Once this is painted, all you're going to see are these sections of stone. Okay, now that I've indicated that, I'm going to break off some pieces. And like here, what I'm going to do is concentrate in this area where two stones are sort of butting up against each other. Maybe carve a little bit out right here, right along that line. Again, I'm going to go after some of these corners. This will get a little bit messy, that's why you probably want newspapers or whatever around. You can even, this is so saw, you can even do it with your fingernails if you want. And just maybe a few more little chunks taken out here. So, one last piece to do, and that's the base. Take my pen and do the same thing. I'm going to mark out some areas that I think would be nice for stone block. Let's go one more down this way, and then a big one in the corner. You can see I'm kind of laying the pen down on its side. And what that does is it makes an even bigger impression. You can use this to make cracks too, just like that. It's however much you want to put on, it's all up to you. I'm going to have some of these now go down the sides of the foam. And once I've got that done, I can pop away some pieces with my knife. Maybe a little bit here. And focusing really on these edges to kind of round those down, erode those a little bit. go after these corners, sometimes even the underside of the whole piece of terrain. One last corner that I want to go after. So, very quickly, some nice texture. Now there's this little extra piece here, and I mentioned having scraps. Well, here's some scraps. Different thicknesses. What do we want to do? I want something to make a stair step here. This piece of scrap will be just perfect for that. So what I'll do is I'll mark it off. Got my cutting board here. Take my knife. That same sawing motion that we've used there, and everything else. So you get a clean line there. I'm going to grab my, need my pen here, which is right here. And I'm just going to put a few lines of texture into those stairs. Pull away more texture, more broken stone. Now let's do some right there. So we've got this just about ready to glue together. There's just one item we have to do yet, and that's our obelisk. See that I've weathered this. I haven't really messed up the top point too much because, well, it took a lot of work to get that. But some of these other little things, these divots that I've cut out of it, well, let's do a few of those. So back to the X-Acto knife. Now here, see, here's maybe a little defect in the foam. Well, let's work with that. Now you might use your pen to indicate some hieroglyphs on here or some other kind of glyphs. Whatever imagery you want. I'm going to keep this maybe as generic as possible. So see, I have another area here that I'd like to pull out. So I got this big chunk, and I'm going to pull out a smaller one after that. Let's go after a piece here. And also, I'm going to take out a little chunk here too. And down here is another, I see there's another defect there. We'll go after one or two of these corners so they're not completely pristine. And maybe one there. Just a tiny bit here. And I'll say that's enough for our weathering. And now it's time for some glue. So let's start this off. I'm gonna get some of my glue here on my biggest piece. And when you put these together, I like to do this. It spreads the glue around, and it just seems to slide around less when you do that first. So what I did was I moved this piece to the back because I need to make enough room for this front piece that we cut. That's the next piece that I'm going to glue on. Glue there, glue there, and slide that around. Stuck together pretty nice. Piece of foam core. Slide it around. Obelisk. Trying to make sure that's as centered as I can make it. And we'll let this dry for a while, and then we'll gonna add some rocks and gravel. With this one I might do more sand. If we just wanted pure sand, that's where the oxide paste is very handy, because when you just glue sand, it tends to collapse a little bit. It follows the glue, and the glue sometimes collapses. This does not collapse. This holds its shape really well. So we will probably use a lot of this to finish off our 2 obelisks. So our obelisk went together nice and easy. No fuss, no muss. Real quick. Well, this totem, it's a little bit trickier. We've, as you can see, we've added 1 or 2 pieces to that upright structure. So I did this. I wanted to show you kind of an easy monument, and then something that's a little bit more complex. Now I've pre-cut some of the pieces that we'll use, not all. What I'm going to do first is something that we did from the previous piece, the obelisk. We're going to do some aging on our ground pieces. And I've got some cut out here. And just like we did on our obelisk, we've got something that just kind of builds up from the floor. I'm using foam core for a thinner level, and then I've got the 1/2 inch pink foam, a little bit of a riser, so it almost looks like steps leading up to it. So what I'm going to do is take my X-Acto and do some quick weathering here, and I'm going to glue this together, let the glue settle and dry while we do some of our other pieces. So I'm going to start this off just like I did with the obelisk, and just trim some of this away. Concentrate on the corners. Now, since this is obviously going to be in a jungle or a tropical environment, you would probably have maybe more curved edges, more wear and tear. We're going to indicate some of that too with the oxide paste, and that's why I want to try and do some of the vines. Not too much, just to give you a little taste of that, but I think that would it would set the environment well. That's pretty well aged. I'm going to set that aside, and I've got my main piece of the base. Oh, I think I'll do just that much more on these edges. Really round these down. Just make it more, make it worn. Get that much more. So every so often the camera's gonna bounce around, shake, because I'm either shaking the table or I just bump into the tripod. This is more of an action video here. It's not quite as sedate as some of the painting videos. Alright. I'm even going to throw my glue on here right now as I'm waiting, because I want this to be as solid as possible, because when I glue this to it, I want this to be sliding around also. I'm going to set that aside, and now I'm going to take my what looks like steps. Not going to affect this edge, because that's what's going to go up against. It's going to go up against the rest of the base. But I have this outer edge. Definitely going to cut away as much as I can. So I'm cutting away from myself wherever possible. Sometimes it's not always possible, but I do it when I can. See, I'm trying to keep my thumb below what I'm cutting. When after the sharp edge of the foam. So set that down there. Work my way around these 4 pieces. And then the last thing I'll weather is going to be the primary base that holds the whole structure. Those 4 taken care of. Now, time to weather our piece of foam core. Really mash these corners. I might just hit those first, like that. So really, I'm going to give this some good wear and tear. Now see those that papery burr like that? That's somewhere maybe the scissors will do a better job of getting rid of that. Okay, a few more, just a few more cuts to make, and I'm going to call that done. So, time for some glue. So this was not all that different from the obelisk. Pretty much the same idea, not terribly complex. And we'll get our steps glued in place. And then I can kind of set this aside for a little bit, let it dry, let the glue set. One last piece. Now sometimes when, like here when I did this aging, I'm going to see later, well I'm going to want to cut this down, because let's look at this over here. See, this sort of follows the wear and tear I put here. So this I'll have to change later once this is set. We'll put this off to the side. That's going to be safe. Now I've got my primary pylon / column here. Just like we did with the obelisk, I've got to carry this measurement all the way around. So I've got my triangle. Can always put it up against the edge, straight edge of my pylon, and what that's going to do is make sure, because I'll be blind as I look around, I can't see the other areas, so that's all marked off. And I extend my blade far enough so it's going to cut all the way through. I'm going to secure the blade. And what I'm going to do is make a series of V-cuts. Let's try and put this so you can see it. I'm going to use that sawing motion again. Cut number 1. Cut number 2. And we have this nice beveled piece that we just cut out. And it's fairly repetitive. We just do this again and again all the way around. Doesn't have to be super precise because again it's worn down. It could be many thousands of years old. Once all 4 of these cuts have been made on each level, we'll do some weathering, just like we did on the main base. And then we can glue it to that base, and then that'll set nicely for a little bit as we do some of the other cuts. So here we go. I can see I want to adjust this cut, make that a little bigger. You can always adjust things. There we go, like that a little better. And like I've done here, I want to pop away some of these little edges here. Scrape away some more. I may not do as deep a cuts here because I have to glue all these heads on here. I'm not going to go too deep with those cuts. I do want to take some of the edge away, but a little lighter touch than we did on the obelisk, because again we're going to fill up this surface with all kinds of goodies. All right. That just about does it. Now, to make this like our sample piece, I need to do a beveled edge along the top here. I'll take out the big knife again and cut away this new blade. Just cuts through this so nice, like butter. You'll know when your blade is getting a little old when it starts to do things like this. When you get all these burrs, it means your blade, it looks real sharp, it may feel sharp to your skin, but it doesn't have that pristine sharpness. So we need to get our top block on here, but I also need to bevel these edges. So I'm going to do the same thing I just did. So that can be glued on top, and I've even got one more piece that goes up here. I'm going to glue all this now to our base, which is sat for a little bit. The glue's had a little chance to collect itself. Actually, I'm going to do a little bit of weathering maybe on these pieces. It's missing a little bit of that. Alright. So I will glue these pieces to the top of my totem. And then glue that to my main base. So we're off to a pretty solid start. So I'm going to clean up the work area, and the next step that we'll do is start to work on these serpent heads. It's time to add our snake heads. Now there's actually 3 different sizes. As we work our way down the totem, they get smaller and smaller. I've got the biggest heads to work on now, and what I used was some of the, this is the 1-inch thick foam, and I had just kind of sized out some pieces that would look nice on this level. And here's the basic shape that we're going to cut for these snake heads. Now as I cut this piece out, I have these here. I'm saving these because as you can tell we've used these at various points around the structure. So I've got my X-Acto. This is a brand new blade that I just put on here. And let's make this so that you can maybe see this, hopefully. This will be in the camera view. And actually point the camera down a little bit in the hopes that you'll just see what I'm doing. I might block the view with my hands. That's just apologize for that. As you can see, I'm lining up the mouth. I'm just going to take my knife, not cutting it through, I'm just indicating. See what I did? I just indicated where my cuts have to be. I'm going to take the X-Acto, fresh new blade, and go straight down. Get all the way through to the other side. Pull that out all the way through, hopefully to the other side. And I'm just about there. I can see, so I'm all the way through. And now take my bigger knife, not about that far, secure it. What I have to do is just make a cut. It goes all the way down. And I have to do it this way because otherwise it'd be a little bit hazardous for my fingers. Using that same sawing motion, you could hear that I just popped through. Got this other cut to make, and it's going to go all the way down. You hear it pop. Before I pull this piece away, I want to cut my bevels. So let's get ourselves a little more blade. And just like I did everywhere else, nice beveled edge. Gonna do it on this side. Have to be sure not to do it on this back part because that's what's gonna glue. That's what's gonna glue to our tower. One last set of bevel cuts to make. We've made all of our bevel cuts. And now, slide that piece out. We've got ourselves a nice snake head. And you can see now I did this just so you could get an idea for see how many burrs there are on this. There's less here. It's because I changed both of my blades. I don't have to worry about this because in some ways that actually adds more weathering to it. If I don't like it, I can always cover it with the oxide paste. But like I said, I'm going to save that piece. And just like I did on the last one, I'm going to mark. I'm going to mark where my cuts need to go. Take the X-Acto all the way down. So I didn't go all the way to the 1-inch thickness because my X-Acto knife never could have made it through. So I did. I got all the way through. Take the big knife with the saw action. back and forth all the way through till I hear it pop. Again, till I can hear that pop. Cut my bevels. I like to do the bevels on the long edges first and then do the short ones. Don't ask me why, it's maybe just a habit. Just a few more cuts to make. And I can slide that piece out, and there we have it. So we have all 4 of our big heads cut out. Now, the other thing I want to show you is that we've got some extra elements here like these teeth. And I think it's going to be easier to add those now than if I add those later. See, that's why I've saved this kind of stuff here. And I'm going to shave this down to about half of its thickness. Taking my big knife, cutting it down. So now it's about half as thick as it was. To make my teeth, I need to cut some triangles right out of this. I'm going to make sure I've got a flat edge there, and I have to make sure the teeth aren't too wide, so it's about, that's as wide as they can be. I cut a few strips like this, and now I'm going to make some teeth. I'm going to save these triangles because guess what? Those triangles are going to be the eyes. I'm going to set those aside as they get made. Another triangle. Okay, so we have a couple of teeth. Let's make sure that they're not too big. Okay, not quite too big. Maybe slice a little bit off. Alright, so I've got 2 teeth. I got my snake head. And I'm going to get out some glue here. Put that down. These are my little bevel pieces that I've got as a kind of glue stick here. And I'm going to put some glue. You can see those little beads of glue there. Take my knife blade, grab one of my little triangles, and try to put this in position. It's harder to do this to make sure you can see it. There we go. Let the glue catch it. And try and make it as straight as I can. You can see, got one tooth in the snake's mouth. Got the other one to do. Put him in there. Now what you might do, if you're going to add details like this, who knows, maybe you paint this first, the inside of the mouth, before you add these teeth. I just wanted you to see how that little detail works. So we're going to do that on all 4 of the snake heads. I'm not going to do that right now because you get kind of bored just watching me cut out 16 little triangles. So I'm going to set those heads to the side right now. because we have a whole nother set of heads we got to make. That's for this middle level. The shape is essentially the same, it's just smaller. This is the 1/2 inch foam. And just like I did for the other heads, I'm going to mark off the mouth, bring back the cutting board. X-Acto goes straight down. Now this is going to be much easier to find out if you're going all the way through. One more. So I'm pretty much all the way through. And I go back to the big knife and cut through all the way through that mouth. I can hear it pop. I'm going to keep this in here for now because if you don't, when you make your beveled cuts, it's not going to be terribly stable, and you run the risk of snapping this piece off. It's not it's not a super tragedy if that happens, because you can just glue it back on, or you just leave it off and chalk that up to thousands of years of weathering. So almost got all my bevels done, just a couple of more. One last bevel, and I can move this and take that out to make sure I'm all the way through. Thought I was, but clearly I was not. That's more like it. I'm going to save that piece because we can certainly use that later on. So I have all 4 of these heads. They're ready to glue. I can, if I want, do a little bit of weathering on those also. Something looks almost a little too pristine. So we'll just add some weathering to it. Take these 4, I'm going to set those aside. There's one more level of the heads to do, and that's our smallest heads. Left the original piece intact, because again, it was just a scrap. This was, I think it was from the warp gate, whatever. It just maybe it was even from another project. I just happened to save it, and it seemed to be just the right width for this last level of the heads. So I'm going to use this, measure off where I need to cut down. So I got my last 2 heads here. This is so in some ways, the smaller these things get, the more difficult some of the cuts are, because it's such tight quarters. So I'm going to mark this off just like I did the others. And here, as I stab this thing through, to be pretty careful that I don't just chop this whole thing in half. So to make sure I'm all the way through. Okay, but I have to use this small X-Acto now. I can't really use the big knife, that's just too big. I heard that pop, I must be through. I'm going to do the next saw cut. So I got my piece cut out. It's got to stay in there though. So I also want to do my bevel cuts. And oops, I see I forgot a bevel. Slide this piece out and save it, because guess what? Those pieces are going to go right on top of the taller heads. I just have one more of the small heads to make. Almost there. All the way through. And now, again, sorry that it's just going to be impossible for the camera to see this without me risking removing some parts of the fingers. So my bevel cuts. All the way around. Make sure I don't forget my bevels this time. So I think we've got all the cuts made. See if that slides out. It does. We set that aside and save it. So now we have four heads for the lowest level. So what I'm going to do is do some aging on those. Let them sit for a while. Put the teeth in on our larger heads. We'll glue those on. And then we can add our final decorative pieces. I have all the teeth added to the heads that are going on the top level. I got all my heads cut out. Now I've glued some on here because again I wanted that glue to set for a while. But I just wanted to show you. Remember all those little pieces that we save? And all these little strips. Now, the reason I save those is because I can cut some nice little eyes. Like that. And I'll probably paint those red, turquoise. I've got my little glue stick here. Put that on. And I'll add my eyes to the snake head. Now, you could add teeth to this second level of heads if you want. You could add a whole bunch more, but I'm just going to leave that. I want this level to be more distinct, so it's not going to, this level won't get the teeth. So I'm going to set that head over there. And I've got a couple of eyes ready to go for this head. Use my knife. Position that like so. So you have 3 levels of snake heads that are ready to go. Push these over a little bit to the side. Now I have to be sure when I'm gluing these on, just have them centered this way, but I need to leave enough room here, right in here, so that our little designs, our actual decorations will show up there. So I'm going to glue on my last set of the heads, just like I've done with everything else. I kind of move it around. It seems to help the glue just set up that much better. So I'll go to all 3 of the heads. Make sure they're reasonably centered and at the same level. And I got one last head. Needs to be glued on right here. Switch that around. Make sure it's where I want it. Maybe a little lower. And now as those set, put this aside, I've got some of these pieces that we've been saving. These bits. I want to use these right here. So I need 4 of those. So there's 4. Set those aside. I also need 4 of these little pieces right here. And I've got 2 pieces from mouths that I've cut out. I'll make that a little more even. Bit more even, there we go. And I'll cut these in half, and that's going to give me 4. And I'll set those aside. Now I also need a few more of these for the next level of head, so I'm going to cut a few more here. Bevel the edge just like I've done on the others. And then set those aside. Now I'm going to raise the level of the camera so that you can actually see what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to move these off to the side where I can reach these. Try and get these 2 centered in the view, and we'll raise the camera. Looks like that should be just about tall enough. You don't need to see the bottoms anymore. So there we go. So I'm going to start off with my 4 large pieces. I'm going to glue those to the top of the totem. Now there is, if you're worried maybe that these might break, or you don't want to worry about them sliding around as the glue dries, well, you could always insert some kind of toothpick, maybe a small needle, maybe even a paper clip. I just, if something breaks off, I can always just glue it back on. I'm not really terribly worried about that. I've almost got my 4 decorative pieces on top of the totem in place. Check the level, seems to be okay. Now I'm going to work my way down, and we need to put these little elements here on top of the head. And it's time for some glue. You could use your little glue stick if you wanted to. Here I just know I wanted a decent amount of glue. And I'm going to maybe use my X-Acto to put some of these in place. So I just don't want to put too much pressure on it with my hands, because that could push my heads down, and I really don't want to do that. So I'm just going to put my 4 decorative pieces in place, and that takes care of my top row of heads. So we're all good there. The bottom level I am going to use my little glue stick because it's going to be harder to get at. I'll take some glue, apply that in here. I'm not going to worry about, say, the glue, I don't know, extra glue around, because there's so many other weathering things and that will do to this. That's really not going to show up at all. Alright, so glue in place. And now I've got my 4 extra little decorative elements. Make sure you can actually see this. Put that gently in place. We've almost got all of the the bits glued on. As far as our pink foam, I could add more things if I want, but this is pretty elaborate. This is much more complicated than that obelisk. With the glue much more settled, it's time to throw on some of our sand and gravel and even work with a little bit of the oxide paste. So what I'm going to do is throw down this piece of mat board here, and that's going to collect some of our excess sand and gravel, because that will get pretty messy. Got my kind of intermediate ballast, heavy all the way around to my lightest. Yeah, looks like everything is pretty much in the screen. I'm going to start off with the Mayan totem here. And I'm going to throw out some beads of glue along the steps. All along this section here. Now I'm going to just do this in pieces. I'm not going to throw glue over the whole thing all at once. I'm also going to bring the glue out just a little bit, like this little trail like that. And I'll go about that far with my glue right now. And the other thing you can do is use your craft brush to manipulate your glue, move it around. So a lot of these gaps are now filled. And I'm going to start off with some of the heaviest gravel. Now I also have some rocks here. Let's just throw out a few of the rocks. And maybe out here is a big rock. Let's throw one up here against the steps. I'm going to take some of these heavier rocks, kind of scatter these around. Not too many. I'm going to go light on the big rocks. Just a few. I'm going to take this kind of intermediate gravel and put a few more. Go a little bit. See, I'm going to throw out a little more of that gravel. Now I'm getting to that medium. So this is going to get even more. And last but not least, I've got sand. I'm going to do this actually over my container, so as much of it as possible goes back into the container. So unlike our obelisk over there, we want to have it be more sand than rocks. Here I wanted a mix of sand and rocks. So I did about half of the gluing. Let's do the other half. Again, throwing out my bead of glue, working my way around. That pretty much covers the lowest level. Now I've got to, wherever these joints are going to meet up here, see how that's just too clean for being out in the jungle for thousands of years. So let's Let's get some debris there. I also want some here. Those two meet, and I'm gonna put a little trail out this way too. I still got some of my big rocks. I'm gonna throw a big rock out here. And let's have one more over here. And then I'll go back to my bigger rocks. Throw some of these out, not too many. Because the idea is the bigger the rocks are, the less that you'll put out there. Now to stop with that, I'm going to go to my next grade. Throw some of that out. But stop. Go to my next grade. A little bit lighter, but throw more of it out. And that leaves one last layer. That's the sand. Make sure that I cover all the glue. So you can see this is a little bit on the messy side. And the bigger the piece of terrain, the more of a mess you're going to make. But see right there, that's gives us a nice finish. Nice finish to our platform. I'll set that aside, and when it comes to the obelisk here, I'll do a little different approach. I'm going to do half of it one way, maybe half the other way. I'm going to do maybe this side in the more traditional gravel and sand, but maybe the other side I'm going to use the oxide paste. So just like I did before, throw out some glue. Now, like I mentioned before, the issue with glue is that it doesn't have a whole lot of body to it. It tends to just sink and collapse. I'm just going to do this halfway and stop. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to put out some little streamers maybe of glue here. Go all the way around this half. And just stop there. Now I'm going to take my craft brush and spread this out a bit. Because if we want more of a sand effect, like sand kind of brushed up against or pushed up against by the wind, by the on the base of our pylon here, okay, that's good enough. So I want to make sure that I don't get too heavy too quickly with this, right? All of the heavier stuff set aside. This is as heavy as we're going to go, and we're going to be pretty light about that too. So just some here. Going to be light about it again, not too much, because this should be more focused on just the sand. I might even throw a bit more glue on top of some of that. Set that aside, and now really try to do the rest with the sand. These are no heavy rocks at all. I want this to be more about the sand for obvious reasons. So I'll put my last bit right here. Shake off the excess. So I'm going to compare that to this. I'm going to say the colors look a lot alike, but you have some substantially different textures here. Look at all this, the heavy rocks. All the heavy rocks that we've got here on this one and this, just by virtue of the sand, hopefully going to give it that desert look as opposed to a more rocky look. Now for the other side, I have some flex paste, oxide paste. It's basically flex paste mixed with sand, as I said before. I will tell you one thing, since this is a color, this is going to really stain your clothes if it gets on your clothes. So unless you don't want stains on your clothes, I would say maybe wear old work clothes, have a lot of paper towels handy, whatever. So start out just try and put this into just the crevice and feather it out. Now, unlike the gravel and sand, see as I build this up here, that's not going to collapse. This glue is going to kind of collapse and there's going to be more of a right angle. This will not collapse. It's going to dry. If I put this much, see how much height I've built up here? Well, that height will be maintained. That's not going to collapse. It's going to stay there. And you can see I can add even more of a sandy texture just by feathering that out. It's a little hard to do with glue and sand. It's a little easier to do the oxide paste. So sometimes it may require a melding of the two materials. So I'm going to do this on the other side of the sand. I can just build this up, and if I need to, water it down. And then spread that out. So that's the advantages of the flex paste, the oxide paste. Sorry, I'm going to keep calling that flex paste for whatever reason. And now wherever I think, see that foam core is just a little too pristine. No, that's where the oxide paste comes in. See what I just did there? I went over that entire edge. It's hard to do that with the sand. So much easier to do it with the flex paste. And I can carry this up the side of the obelisk. So again, each thing has some advantages, some disadvantages. It's going to be up to you to really learn the properties of each. I can tell you here, but there's no substitute for you just trying it yourself. And you may find a different method that works better for you. I have adapted many things that I've seen from somewhere else. And I got a gap to fill here. So fill that up. And I'll go back to the water every so often because this is all about sand, and I want to feather out that sand texture. And we're just about. Let's say we want to make a really big pile of sand against the obelisk here. So I've got my big blob out there, and I'll just pull away at that, move it around, pull it down, Pull it up the side. So here, this is almost, I can almost bury that. That's the kind of thing you just would never be able to do with the other material. Now what I can almost say is that maybe this side is where the wind blows, and this side that's where there's not as much built up sand. So I'll build this up even more. And this side is even, maybe it's just more sand blasted, so carry that up the side of the obelisk itself. And I'll just continue to build up my level of sand that seems to have accumulated with the wind on this side of our monument. So, two sides, two very different results, but still very usable. I'm going to carry this around even up to here. Every so often I'll water that down. Just really thin it out. That's what's nice about this stuff, is that it's really, it's paint. Paint but sand, but paint nevertheless. You can also, once your glue dries well enough, you can carry the flex paste, oxide paste over the areas that you glued, so that it doesn't look too bizarre. Once there's paint on this, even if you just prime it black or brown or whatever, as soon as you do that, you won't see this kaleidoscope of colors. So I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to clean up the area, and we're going to go back to this oxide paste, and we're going to put some of that also on our Mayan totem. I have my oxide paste ready to go. My brush, a little more water this time around, and this is going to be used to fill in some gaps. And let's make sure that you can, you've got a decent view. See, there's some gaps here. Well, no better way to close those gaps with some of this flex paste, oxide paste. Yep, that's just gonna happen again and again. I'm gonna pile some up here. I mean, some dirt is accumulated up there. Didn't really want a lot of rocks and gravel up on the top. It's just adds a little bit of spice and flavor to your monument. So just wherever you see gaps, that's pretty much where a lot of these heads are going to meet the main pylon. Go ahead and do that. The other side benefit is, as I've mentioned before, it'll make some of these joints even a little bit stronger, so it'll be less likely maybe to crack or break. Where the texture might be a little too rough, so I'm really going to add more flex paste that doesn't really have any kind of water in it. But there's times where I want the flex paste to move a little easier, so oxide paste. I keep calling it flex paste because for many years that's all I knew about was flex paste. And that's essentially an acrylic gesso. And I would use that to coat my canvases, my masonite boards, whatever it was I was painting on. So again, where I see things that are a little bit on the rough side, or in contrast to, say it's just too clean, it's too pristine, well, can't have that in the jungle. So I'll just cover as much of this as I feel is necessary. You may not want any at all. You may do much more than I just did. It's kind of fun to work with this stuff. I guess there also is sometimes a temptation to do a little too much. I don't want to completely obliterate everything that I've done with my cuts and some of my other weathering techniques. But there's still one final addition to our totem, and that's going to be some vines. You could do it strictly just with some type of foliage. I know there's aquarium plants that are basically in the shape of a vine, and that's fine. It's just, problem is the aquarium plants, as some of you might have used those, they are also very shiny, hard to paint. It's kind of obvious that they're aquarium plants. And here I just wanted to make something that's a little less obviously an aquarium plant. So just work your way around your structure as much or as little as you need to. And the last thing we'll get to is to put some vines on our monument. The final details that I want to add to my Mayan totem are these vines right here. Got some along the ground too, and I chose the epoxy sculpt because it just it seemed to stick a little bit better to this material than the green stuff. The green stuff would mostly just stick to you, and there's just some other fun properties with the epoxy sculpt that you can do. So we've got A and B. Can mix them together. Now, unlike green stuff, it's a little bit harder to tell one of these parts from the other. So I would suggest making sure they stay, these containers stay closed, because once it's all mixed together, it's almost exactly like part A. Unlike green stuff, where you can clearly tell the difference between the blue and the yellow. So I want to mix this together pretty well. Once there's no cracks here, when you smush this out, then you know you've got something pretty good, something you can work with. And I'm mostly going to focus on with this tool right here. Gotta have some water nearby, because this will, while it's not light green stuff, it will want to stick to you and to your tools. So I'm going to put this snake out here. What I'm going to do is start to taper that off. I've got my little snake here tapered towards the end, and I'll pick a spot where I want to start this, and maybe I'll have it go up through here and through this way. So I start positioning it here. And then kind of put a few bends in it. And twist it along. So what I'm going to do is try and anchor that down right here. And then I'm going to try and anchor it here too. See, just by pressing it down a little bit. Because you don't want it to make it look natural, you need some sharper bends to it. It can't just look like you've rolled some tape over the top of it. So trying to get that anchored. What I want is a piece that comes off this way. So again, try and roll out another one of these little snakes like so. And I will try to get it attached right here. A little bit of water, not too much. And now I'm going to try and anchor that piece just like I did my original snake that I put down. And I'll try and do the same thing where I get some unusual, I don't know, some nice bends in it. And it's okay to have these double back on themselves, see, like that. So it just kind of winds its way up towards the top of the totem. I'll make a few smaller snakes here. And just a matter of connecting however many of these you want to do. You can do tons of these. You could put leaves on here. Do all kinds of fun stuff. It depends how much work you want to put into it, really. I really love terrain, so I don't mind putting a lot of work into it. And I'm just going to keep on adding over and over again. More and more pieces. So that's how you can dress up your totem even more. Kind of looks nice with these vines all over it.
Crossing the point where I can't go back. Sweetens and desert